To lose a loved one is heartbreaking at any time, but to learn years later that in death their bodies were tampered with and body parts taken would surely be devastating. This is the terrible reality now confronting families in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Only now are they learning about the final indignity carried out on relatives, spouses, even baby children. Helen Daly from our sister program Sunday has been investigating how, without permission and without compassion, Australian doctors and medical researchers stole from the dead.
In 1997, Deborah Ford's baby, Shannon, was born with a congenital heart problem. When she was just 3 months old, she suffered a cardiac arrest at Sydney's Westmead Children's Hospital. A hospital counsellor told Deborah that after the post-mortem, Shannon's heart would be kept for further examination.
Well, we had to accept the fact that she would be buried without her heart. It was really hard to accept, but we had to.
But what Deborah and the baby's father could not accept was the contents of a letter that arrived before they'd even buried their little girl.
It was from a researcher at Sydney University requesting Shannon's lungs for her research study into asthma in children.
So what did you think about getting this letter?
Oh, we were just absolutely stunned. It was horrifying. It was horrifying. We're still in shock from losing our daughter, and then this letter arrives. Do you kookaburra love?
For 3 years, Deborah pleaded for an explanation. What had happened to her baby's lungs? Finally, late last year, the Westmead Forensic Institute confirmed they had taken and kept them. Why do you think you were denied this information over 3 years?
I've got no idea, and that's a really good question. I'd really like them to answer that.
Why were her baby's lungs taken and she wasn't informed for 3 years?
I think you need to. You've spoken to the forensic pathologists about that.
Oh, well, they said that you wanted to speak about that.
Did they?
Dr Andrew Wilson is the New South Wales Chief Health Officer.
Well, my understanding is that they were taken for the purposes of the coronial examination.
But why did it take her 3 years to have proper confirmation?
It's a clear example of a number of the breakdowns that can occur in the system and the ways that we've got to do things better. I don't want to see Deborah Ford's case happen again.
But sadly, Deborah Ford's is not an isolated case.
They've violated her. They've taken away a part of her without our permission or knowledge. It's like they've raped her.
Stan and Julie Eliades lost their 8-week-old daughter Sonia in 1988. The autopsy was performed at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. When they gave their consent, Stan and Julie insisted that all organs removed be returned to the baby's body for burial. The doctors agreed, but that just didn't happen. You'd specifically said we want the organs returned, and the doctors had agreed to that.
They said that's exactly what will happen. Everything will go back in the right place.
So how did you feel finding out 12 years after your daughter died that she hadn't been buried with her brain?
Furious. Rapeable, angry, cheated, violated, you name it. I mean, I still have trouble believing it's happened. I'm furious.
Against their consent, against their express wishes, Sonia's brain had been kept by the hospital.
When I queried that with Dr. Monagle, he explained they probably had a feeling of wanting to protect us because we'd suffered enough hurt, and my point and argument is this: the hardest thing they had to tell us was that our daughter was going to die.
Do you feel it's unforgivable, the pain you've caused these families?
I think I deeply regret that that in the past these practices were not as good as they could have been.
Over the past 9 months, Dr Paul Monagle, the spokesman for the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, has had to face families affected by the news that their child's organs may have been secretly taken. In October last year, the hospital admitted it had kept and stored the hearts of 1,200 children. So in your labs here, you could still have the heart from a child whose parents thought that child was buried with its heart 10, 15 years ago.
Yes, that's true. The only really effective way to teach paediatric cardiac surgeons about the huge variety of abnormalities they need to be able to deal with is for them to actually have access to a collection of hearts that have those abnormalities so they can learn.
Could they tell you what happened to your daughter's brain? Could they give it back to you?
I need to know. They can't give it back to me because they don't have it. They feel quite strongly it's been destroyed as bio-waste or incinerated.
It's a terribly sad indictment of a system that I think either with the best gloss on it tries to protect people, with the worst gloss on it demonstrates almost a paternalistic lack of care for the needs of individuals and the next of kin.
Last week, the New South Wales Minister for Health, Craig Knowles, revealed that an astonishing 25,000 body parts have been stockpiled in universities and hospitals in New South Wales alone. A third were taken at post-mortems. Many, improperly, were kept without family consent.
Certainly over the longer period, it's been the practice rather than the exception where body parts, body tissues have been taken and retained for long-term purposes without the proper and fully informed consent of the next of kin. And that's something that has to change.
If you were to die suddenly, mysteriously or violently, the state coroner would order a post-mortem to determine your cause of death. No family consent is needed, and it's legal to take your organs so long as they directly relate to the cause of death. Taking anything else requires the consent of the next of kin, and failure to do that is effectively stealing. This is the Institute of Forensic Medicine, better known as Glebe Morgue in Sydney. It's no stranger to strife. Both the former workers you're about to hear from were adversely named in a 1996 corruption inquiry. They say the inquiry ignored their allegations that the morgue was a virtual body parts supermarket for medical researchers. So what body parts were taken?
Spinal columns, spinal cords, femurs, lungs, hearts, organs.
Was that to determine cause of death?
No.
Simon McLeod worked as a forensic assistant. What other body parts did you either take or you knew were being taken out of the morgue?
Middle ears. They were taken on a large scale for a short period. Every case would have their middle ear removed.
Is there any possibility that there might have been a tumour on these middle ears and that's why they were needed for further inspection?
Possibly on one case in 1,000, but not on 15 cases in one day.
Mostly femurs I witnessed or experienced removal myself.
Femurs, you removed femurs?
Yes.
The long bone in your leg?
Yes.
Dion Naylor, another former worker.
As far as I know, a particular student, medical student from Sydney University, was doing a thesis on long bones. He got those 100 specimens from various deceased persons at the morgue.
One particular case was an elderly lady. I was asked to take a whole spinal column.
What does that mean?
The entire spine.
From your neck?
From the neck right down to the coccyx, and then replace it with a broomstick.
We are there to help people, and in actual fact it's been said of forensic facilities, this is a place where death delights to help the living.
Associate Professor John Hilton is Director of the Institute of Forensic Medicine at Glebe, and he's a staunch defender of its practices. Why would knee joints, femurs, shoulder joints be removed as part of the autopsy process?
Well, once again, if someone has been involved in trauma, particularly motor vehicle trauma, I put it to you, why not?
Okay, so these cases were, you feel sure, only in trauma cases?
As far as I can recall, yes.
Not so. Glebe Morgue's own documents reveal a very different story. This list of retained organs clearly shows that femurs and knee joints were being taken from people who died of heart disease or alcoholism, causes of death that appear to have nothing to do with legs or knees. In at least 10 of these cases, no family consent was given. We've got some cases who clearly it wasn't trauma. They were, that one was heart disease. This is a femur that had an abdominal aneurysm. This was a knee joint, 2 knee joints taken out of someone who had a sudden adult cot death. Again, this was a femur. I just wonder how you justify that a femur is part of the autopsy for a heart disease patient.
It's not appropriate for the professor to comment on autopsies which he wasn't involved in.
These are autopsies done under his reign, and I just wonder if he can... Despite several interruptions by a health department spin doctor...
St George, and I ask that you not film me, and I need to stop the
interview. So are you interfering in this interview when Professor Hilton continued the interview? Well, I would have thought when a cause of death has been established as heart disease, that a layperson would look at that and say, well, why the hell did they have to take 2 knee joints?
No, I hear what you're saying. I don't agree with you.
Can you see how the community might be alarmed by this sort of practice?
I would hope the community would not be alarmed by it.
But even more astonishing are the macabre forensic practices alleged to have happened behind closed doors at Glebe.
One of the senior pathologists there was doing a study into stabs and blood splatter, and he would come down and ask for a body to be rolled over onto its face, onto its stomach, so he could stab it, and then investigate how far the knife went. I certainly wouldn't want one of my loved ones or friends or something like that to be used in that manner. You know, it's virtually a dartboard.
Would you approve of stabbings of bodies, whether they be donated or not? And has that happened? We've been told it has.
I have certainly used a surgical knife and inserted it, you can call it stabbing if you like, onto a rib, through a rib, or between a rib, in order to satisfy myself how much force is needed to do this. This is a question which is put in the court. It's of great value if the expert witness doesn't theorise and philosophise, but in actual fact knows the force that's required.
I'm sure it's of great value. I'm wondering whose consent you got to do that to that body.
Well, in actual fact, I got no one's consent to do that, and that's what you've been waiting for me to say. I didn't. But I regarded it as a legitimate test and examination to perform.
Dr. Hilton will have to answer for his own actions in the end.
Will you be asking him about that?
Well, I'll make sure that any of these issues are properly and fully investigated, naturally.
It's always been swept under the carpet. Maybe by it happening again and being brought out in public like this again, maybe someone will sit up and take notice.
There was no dignity left for those people. I need to stop.
There is no doubting the value of medical research, but not when it exploits grieving families and pays little respect to the dead.
It's got to be stopped. As far as I'm concerned, they're scavenging. They're scavenging from bodies. That's what they're doing.
This morning, New South Wales Health Minister Craig Knowles stood down the head of the Institute of Forensic Medicine, Professor John Hilton, pending the results of an inquiry into practices at Glebe Morgue.
Hello, I'm Sarah Abo. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our Extra Minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.